Hello, this is Dan Nowman Niswander. You're watching the Nowman Show, and my great guest today is Jerry Koch-Gonzalez, and he is a part of a website called sociocracyforall.org. And what we're going to be talking about in this episode is sociocracy. Jerry, how are you?
I'm good. Glad to be with you on the show here today, Dan.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate that. I've been in a series of trainings with you on the subject of sociocracy, working with a worker cooperative group here in the Los Angeles area. It's been outstanding, to say the least. First of all, for those of you out there who may not know uh, what sociocracy is, Jerry, can you give us a basic definition of sociocracy?
Sure. Well, let's start with just the word itself. Sociocracy, the ocracy means governance, and socio means the socio, so those who associate together. So it means governance by those who associate together, which is, you could distinguish that from representative democracy, where governance is by those who are elected to do things. So this is much more a deeper participatory type of democracy, where everyone's voice matters. And there's several different core elements to that. One is decision-making, in the groups, what we call a circle, so a team of people. And decisions are made by consent. And the consent is a little different than consensus. Sometimes we just say that the sort of the bar that we name is not do we all agree, but does anybody object? So when we only object if we think there's going to be some harm done to our being able to accomplish our purpose. So it's trying to, because what we want is to be able to try something, to move ahead, go do something, and then this is another core principle of sociocracy: learn from our actions and make another decision based upon what we've, the evidence, the experience that we've had.
So that way, it's most people think about democracy. They think about majority rule, which that is what it is essentially. But it really isn't complete, as I see it, unless everyone has a voice. So, or at least it allows you to examine things more thoroughly when everybody has a voice. Correct?
Right. I mean, the problem with majority rule democracy is really only the winners of the vote have a voice. And when you live in the context that we are in, with the amount of media control, corporate influence, et cetera, even that is questionable. So sometimes I say about representative democracy, it would be a nice thing if we could have one person, one vote, but we're not even there, right? In the context of sociocracy, we're working typically in a smaller group, so that you can see the 5, 6, 7, 8 people who are in your group, and you know what's going on with them. You're working with them over time. And when you make decisions by consent, you're really going through processes of rounds of really hearing each person's voice, whether it's exploring the topic or actually making, the moment of decision making. And that way, you know that every voice counts and you have your time, where you don't have to raise your hand and try to outcompete other people or talk louder or repeat yourself. You take your turn. And so the people who tend to be quieter know that they have some protected space. And the people who talk a lot know that they have to, just take their turn and not dominate informally, which is part of what happens with consensus a lot, is that there's an informal process of domination by those who speak aloud or speak loudly or speak forcefully. So that's one of the things I really like about sociocracy, is the rounds. Every voice matters and it's protected by the round.
Yeah, because consensus seems to, you're right, it seems to not really allow every voice an equal part of the participation. And if a person talks more, if they talk louder, yeah. I mean, you can still have consensus, but that doesn't mean everybody is getting a voice. And that's one of the things I noticed from doing the trainings, is that it just makes us much more conscious of that. When you're forced to, right, to think about that, it really is. It can be a humbling experience for those of us that like to talk a lot,
Yeah, it's a culture change.
It
It's
is.
very much a culture change. And it goes very deep that way. Once you really start taking in, everyone's voice matters. Um, and the context of everyone's voice matters is usually of an organization that has a purpose. So it's not just everyone in your neighborhood, but what is it that gathers us together is a particular purpose. So whether you're trying to create a bakery cooperative or a social change organization, whatever it is, what is your common purpose that's bringing you together? And around that aim, that's where you have the consent of the decisions that are supporting taking action on that. And I mentioned before, yeah, just there's another key element that's important. I said decision making by consent is one of those key elements, and then the feedback process. You do things, you learn from experience. You're always evaluating your meetings. You evaluate everything so you can keep learning. Continuous evolution, through feedback. And the third element is distributed authority, meaning authority is not held either at the top or by one large group. You try to, okay, we've got a lot of tasks to do. Let's assign different areas of responsibility to different teams and give them the authority to act. Within some limits, perhaps like a budgetary limit or some other limits, but they are free within that to act. They don't have to keep coming back to the people above or to the whole group for consent to move on with whatever they're trying to act on. So that's one of those things that also, not only in the sort of the top, different from top-down hierarchy, but different from the kind of large group volunteer kind of organizations where you meet in a room with 40 people and you're trying to make decisions. So let's distribute authority rather than keep it in the whole group or in the people at the top.
I know in the context of a worker cooperative, a lot of the processes are involved in, it's kind of like departments, in a company. So I know with Arizmendi or even what we're doing here, the idea of creating circles for each kind of department, whether it's for the functioning, the front part of the bakery, that interacts with the customers, and then the back office that we would call, um,
The house.
accounting. Yeah, exactly.
Front of the house and back of the house.
The back of the house, in front of the house. Yeah, like administrative, accounts payable, accounts receivable, whatever. And then to have, the outside uh, individuals too that might offer some kind of input into, as an outsider looking in, yet still be, passionate, about the work that we're doing, and have a circle there, and just, thinking about, covering all the bases, of with a circle, as you mentioned, a small group of people, and it's a great place to start too if a company gets really big. Let's say like Montorgon in the Basque region of Spain. If you start with that process, then it just makes it easier. Just create more circles, and still thinking in the context of small but getting big. And in general, worker-owned cooperatives do tend, when they're done this way, they do tend to survive longer than a lot of enterprises that are organized in different ways, because it does include more of the voices of the people that actually work there. So, in now, when did you first get started in sociocracy? When did you first become aware of it? When you were originally from Cuba, correct?
Yeah, I was born in Cuba in this is 2021 now. I'm 69 years old. I came from Cuba when I was 8 years old. Arrived in New York City, finished growing up there. I was raised Catholic, through all of that time. When I was in college, I started exploring both psychology and sort of group living, communes, or intentional community. And starting to look at how do we change, the world. The world didn't, obviously one of the things about thinking about psychology is, gee, I don't want to be a psychologist that helps adjust people to a sick society. We want to change the society so that it's a healthy society. So that's part of why I did not wind up becoming a psychologist. Instead, I became, more of a community or, community change. How do we change the world one community at a time or one organization at a time, building a movement, building networks. The sort of maybe central part of my formation was really part of being a group called Movement for a New Society. It existed from 1971 to about 1988. Our frame of reference was revolutionary nonviolence. And so for me, sociocracy fits in right there. Everyone's voice matters. You just don't roll over others, even if you're right. As that quote from Gandhi of we don't want to win over the British. We want to win the British over, meaning convince people that this path is a healthy path, rather than try to knock out the previous hierarchy and put our hierarchy in place. And Movement for Society was organized in small groups, collectives, and spread around the country. And we did a lot of training work. And so that's a lot of still what I, okay, Sociocracy for All is primarily almost a training organization with small groups that do different pieces of the work. And thanks to the internet, in a sense, we're global. So it was through that, that was kind of my formation. I've lived in cooperative housing pretty much all my adult life. I live in a co-housing community here in Amherst, Massachusetts, where I am with my family. And I went to a conference talking about nonviolent communication, which is also dear to me. It's a process of just trying to develop really clear, authentic communication between people. And at that conference, I met people from another co-housing community and also someone who was promoting sociocracy. And I'd heard about it once before, but this time it's like, okay, nonviolent communication, cooperative housing, sociocracy, these things are all coming together. This is meaningful. And so I immediately just, looked into it and fell in love with it, realized it was solving some of the issues that I was experiencing in my co-housing community, because we were operating by consensus. And our community is now, I think, about 26 years old. And we've been we adopted sociocracy about 8 or 9 years ago. So before we adopted sociocracy, I was going, this consensus process is as radical as I would like to think consensus is. It was actually conservative, not politically conservative, but conservative in that it was really hard to make changes, because you'd be there in a group of 40 and some people would have prepared some notion about how to do something. And then one or two people say, oh, I object, I block. And it's like, okay, then we go back to create a committee to try to work things out. And then after a while, the committee stops meeting. It was just very, it was kind of a discouraging process. So when I understood sociocracy as consent, so not the perfect solution, but good enough for now, safe enough to try, and distributed authority, so no, we're no longer trying to make all these decisions in the whole group, like those are the key things that are different. And then additionally, the whole feedback process of like, okay, we can make a policy and we can change it 2 years from now. So let's actually put a turn date. Let's say every 2 years, we're going to examine these policies, so that they don't get stale, they get refreshed. And the whole selection of people to roles is also part of that. Most of us in co-housing or in social change movements, a lot of us are really kind of wary of leadership, because what does leadership mean? Oh, leadership means somebody's going to pull off their power over trip on you, and we don't like that. So we are, a lot of us in social change are those who suffer from, having experienced power over and know that there's a better world possible. I was going to say that, it's interesting, just the dynamics of trying to adopt sociocracy, adopt egalitarian governance, means that sometimes the people who traditionally have had power, how do they adjust to sharing power? But also the people who have traditionally not had power also need to adjust to now having a voice and having shared responsibility. So there's a cultural change in both directions.
Yeah, definitely. And in the context of, like, say, a worker-owned cooperative, it's like, most people are used to having their primary job or their primary function, but when you become a worker owner, you have additional responsibilities that you
Mhm.
share with other people. And it's like you were saying earlier, it's cultural transition. It's a change in the cultural paradigm. So the more that this is done, on
Yeah.
more groups that do it, it forces basically the culture and the society to change, and that can be everything from the community where you live to globally, especially now with the internet.
Mhm.
And these are in that context, these are very exciting times. I'm tired of talk. I mean, I don't mind talking if it leads to action, and but it leads to action in such a way that it can actually start solving some problems, however they are, or organizing for some kind of a structure that, in creating a worker-owned cooperative, it helps some people get back to work, for instance.
The dream here is that we keep evolving an ecosystem of, ecosystem of collaborative cooperative organizations. I take the very simple example of the bakery. Okay, we have a cooperative bakery. Now, some of their baked goods get sold also in the local cooperative, food co-op, or in cooperative restaurants in the area. And the artist co-op has some of their paintings or artwork in the bakery. As the customers come in, they can also buy those things. So, what are the mutual reinforcements of different cooperatives that can, affect each other? I mean, as I've, gotten to know you, Dan, talking about the downtown Crenshaw Rising and the possibility of a mall that would then have a multiple co-op stores that would all in some way mutually reinforce each other. I like that dream.
This is not about a mall. This is about addressing the needs that people actually have in the community. They need places to live that are affordable, and they need places to work that are welcoming and of their talents and skills. And this does all of the above. And we're going into this, with the idea of sociocracy, that we understand that it's a different kind of environment than San Francisco. There's only certain places here that are, more focused on foot traffic, for instance. So we may have to think about other avenues for, I mean, it's just interesting. I enjoy it. I enjoy the challenges of like thinking about the real world situations and how do we adapt to this, Um, and the best way to get to that is through sociocracy. So like in a meeting that we had just last night, I asked the group, I said, I'm going to be talking to you today. And I said, well, what would you like me as a question or as a topic? And someone said, how do we actually do this? How do we actually implement sociocracy? And so I know what your answer is going to be, but how would you, if somebody was going to come to you and say, Jerry, how do you actually, in let's say in a business that you're starting up, or in a social movement that you're creating or working with, how do you implement sociocracy?
Yeah. Well, of course, the answer is it depends. It depends upon your starting context. Sometimes we say, hey, what is sociocracy? Sociocracy is, has several principles. The core one, no one ignored, all voices matter. Then how do you carry that out? One of the most ancient practices is the round, right? Just everybody in the circle speaks. And so if you're in an organization, you can just at some point just say, hey, I'd like to hear from everybody on this. Can we just do a round and hear from everybody? You're not calling it sociocracy. Sociocracy doesn't own the concept of a round, but you've just now done something that invites everyone's voice. And similarly, you can say, hey, this particular proposal that's on the table, not so sure about it, but I'm willing to try. Could we just say, let's try it for 6 months and do an evaluation of it? And if it's working great, let's continue. But if it's not, let's adjust it. Can we commit to like a 6-month term and evaluate it then? So now you've just introduced, the whole concept of feedback and continuous evolution without calling it sociocracy. So those are, there's all those kinds of elements that you can do. How do you select for somebody to be your facilitator or to be the leader of your organization? There's a process for that. That is participatory. That's open voice. So all those kinds of things you can do without labeling it sociocracy. And if you want to label it sociocracy, you could say, okay, does this organization want to adopt this particular structure? There's a whole book, that written about it that explains all the things you can possibly want to know. So we can adopt it, wholesale, like all at once, and let's just frame out our different circles and how they're going to work and how they're going to interrelate and how we're going to make decisions and write all that down and go. So everything from one end to the other is how you can implement it.
And you wrote a book with Ted Rao. Is it Rao?
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce?
Ted Rao, yeah.
Yeah.
Many Voices, One Song, Shared Power with Sociocracy.
And that basically
we're
is
excited maybe for you, because you're in LA. It's been translated into Spanish.
fantastic.
So by some of our own members, and it's it's also been translated into Portuguese, and we're working on some other languages.
Oh, fantastic.
And there's another new book. Ted Rao wrote, just published a new book called Who Decides Who Decides. I love that title, as it's really addressing how do you create an organization in 3 meetings.
Oh, really?
Right from the very beginning, you have to have a name.
Yeah.
You have to know how you're going to decide, and who are your founding members, in a sense. Those are the core things, So once you know what you're trying to do and how you're going to make decisions, and then who is that group that's going to start making those decisions. So your clarity about membership is key. You can't, if you have a drop-in kind of group, then you never know. Next week somebody else shows up and they have a different idea. Or so you can't, it's hard to get forward momentum if you just have drop-in people coming in and out. So that's, voluntary organizations sometimes suffer that, when you're when an employee in an organization where everybody's a staff person, it's different because they're there for presumably some length of time. But sociocracy does depend upon people working together over time. So knowing who your membership is and knowing how you're going to make decisions. I mean, we've run into several groups that they've already exist. They've got a whole bunch of people and they don't have agreement about how they make decisions.
Oh, really?
So then
Wow.
What do you do? On what basis do you make a decision about how you make decisions?
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're in this rabbit hole. And if you don't think about it, then you typically will do one of the two things. You'll assume consensus because that's what everybody in your particular culture does, or you'll assume majority rule because that's what everybody in your particular culture does. So those are the tendencies depending upon where we sit. So if we don't want to just start with assumptions, we have to be intentional.
And we have to understand structure. Even organization or meetings themselves have to have structure.
Yeah.
And it's in some ways we're not reinventing the wheel, but in some ways we are reinventing the wheel when we include everybody's voice, and even in that process too, going in the round and letting everybody speak. I mean, that's such a paradigm shift for a lot of people.
It's such a human thing.
I know. It's so
Yeah.
it's totally natural. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, there's so many fundamental things that we have overlooked.
We promote, a kind of a standard agenda for a meeting, and it always starts with an opening round. Everybody in the group gets to say how they are arriving at the meeting, which can mean I'm really upset because my cat died yesterday, or it can mean I'm feeling really tense because of something that's on the agenda, or it can mean, I'm just really happy right now because I went for a long swim and I'm feeling great.
Yeah.
It could be any of those things, right? But you're showing up as who you are, and everybody gets to hear that. So if somebody's kind of in a difficult place, then you can understand their behavior in the meeting in a different way. It's not like, oh, why are they being such a jerk? It's like, oh, I know that person's cranky because X. It's a very different nature of being together. And then being really clear, okay, what's the administrative aspects of making sure our meeting's well organized? Okay, let's have consent to our agenda. And that's an important piece, because in the group, the circle, so what we call the group, that is consenting to what we're going to talk about. It is not imposed by some leader or some facilitator who planned the agenda ahead of time. They might have planned it ahead of time, but now it's up to the group to decide, yes, this makes sense, or no, I think we should change this agenda around in this or that way.
I'm in meetings now where that's essentially how the meeting does start, and in some cases, like, when is our next meeting going to be? Sometimes is the first order of business, so that we
Yeah.
can say, we know on this certain date at this certain time, we're going to be meeting again. Okay, now that's done. Now here is the rest of the agenda for this meeting. And we go over it, and then does everybody approve of it? Okay, great. And we start actually discussing. And Zoom, as the technology is really built for this kind of thing. It has breakout rooms if you need to be more specific. It allows you to raise your hand or to have a reaction of some kind, so you're not interrupting the speaker with emojis. Well, Jerry, we've run out of time, and I do appreciate you and so gracious with your time today. And I think we got into the very basics of sociocracy, which I think is well, that's where you have to start, right? But
Mhm.
to get people to think about the fact that everyone has a voice in whether you're talking about creating a new business, whether you're talking about a social movement, or some other kind of objective where there's organizing in meetings. It just makes perfect sense to, if you really care about participatory democracy, this is a way to actually make it happen and not just talk about it. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And could you share with us all your contact information, your website, books, anything else you want to reiterate, where people can find out more about you and your work?
Sure. And as we like to say, in terms of the standard meetings, we always close the meeting with an evaluation, the closing round. How was this meeting? And so thank you, Dan, for this conversation. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.
And the information. So sociocracyforall.org. That is our website. Tons of stuff there around training, articles, lots of free stuff. We really go a lot on the Creative Commons license, which means information is accessible, as in our name, Sociocracy for All implies. And the books, Many Voices, One Song, Shared Power with Sociocracy, and Who Decides, Who Decides. Can also get both of those through our website or through any online retailer. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. There's just, go to the website because there's just so much there. Sign up for the mailing list. You get, a couple of things a month with upcoming webinars or events, articles that have been written, etc.
Again, thank you so much, Jerry. Really appreciate taking the time today. And this is Niswander. You've been watching the Nowman Show, and always remember to stay present in the moment now.